Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Friday morning of what I'm sure was a busy week for you as well. I'm Debbie Pixton with the Consortium for Public Education, here with my colleagues Christy Kuhn and Aaron Altimus. Our colleague Sarah Brooks, who also assists us with these workshops, is out of town today, but you may hear from her in the future, so we always want to introduce her as well. If you are not familiar with the Consortium for Public Education, we are a 35-year-old nonprofit based in McKeesport, focused on future readiness for the last several years, and focused on really helping students answer three questions: who am I, who do I want to be, and how do I get there? We do that through a variety of programs. Most of you are familiar with at least some of those programs, lots of familiar names on the registrations for today. But, we have student-facing programs, programs that help foster partnerships with businesses and post-secondaries, and then also programs designed just for educators. The work really takes the form of professional development and professional learning, events and programming to help foster and help know how to work with businesses and post-secondaries better, how to help students get work-based learning experiences through those partnerships. And then some programming that really helps educators foster systemic change in their systems. Our topics for today are all about the fundamentals of future readiness, just to give us a common language for what that means and what are some of the core elements that the consortium tries to help with. So we'll talk about an overview of what PDE says and how they think about future readiness. We'll specifically look at student plans, career ready skills, and social emotional learning. We'll talk a little bit about 339 plans. Don't worry, we're not going to provide a state type of presentation on 339 plans or on Act 158. But as we know, those are top of mind for a lot of you. Didn't want to not mention them for today. And really, we want to start today's presentation with just, you are already doing great things in future readiness for your students. This is something we know is happening everywhere. You care about your students, but it might look like one of these three things. It might be a bit haphazard. Things are happening in pockets. They're not necessarily connected. Most people don't know all of the things that are happening. In some cases, it's more siloed, right? This piece is over here, and this piece is over here, and this piece is over here, but they don't really talk to each other. They don't inform one another or benefit from one another. And students who might be a part of one thing and another thing may not understand how those pieces fit together. And then we see a few instances where your future readiness is really systemic and it's really tied together, and all the elements really support one another and help foster this kind of continuum for students and for staff to help equip students to be prepared for their lives after high school. So, what does the Pennsylvania Department of Education say about future readiness? In a nutshell, I'm sure you all are familiar. It's complex, it's nuanced, it's ongoing, right? It's the entire K-12 spectrum, and it's evolving because they keep changing the requirements, the things they expect, the way they talk about it. So we try and always keep up to date on what's going on over there so that we can help you better help your students. Now, Pennsylvania really has a pretty broad approach to career readiness in Pennsylvania. And if you haven't seen this diagram before, it is really all of these different parts are initiatives, programs that the state has said support career readiness in Pennsylvania. And they expect to see as evidence of addressing all of those different aspects of career ready PA through things like work-based learning experiences, artifact collection, guidance plans, Act 158 plans, student plans, social emotional skill building, and then credentials and certificates, just to name a few. Now, today's content is embedded in three parts of this diagram: the K-12 school guidance plan, the 339 plan, your career education and work standards, and then your PA career ready skills. So we won't talk about everything, but I'm sure many of you are familiar with some other aspects of this piece. There it is. So all of you are also probably familiar with the Future Ready PA Index. That is really designed to be the public information about how schools and districts are doing related to their future readiness. And we really talk about that college and career readiness piece on the right there, which includes things like graduation rate, career standards benchmarks, industry-based learning indicators, the percentage of students participating in rigorous courses, and the post-secondary transitions. So we won't cover all of those today, but that's that space where we're working today. We're not worried about test scores. We're not worried about chronic absenteeism today. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Christy to talk about some of the college and career measures.
Thanks. Real quick, because we are recording, if you have any questions, we're going to do a question and answer at the very end. But if you want to put them in the chat while we're going so that we know to go back to those, or if you have just a, wait, what did that mean question, throw that in the chat and we can answer that while we're going. So thank you everybody for joining us. And let's talk about some of these college and career measures. So you all know about the artifacts. You've heard artifacts. You've been collecting them in some way for several years. Just a real quick reminder. The artifacts have to demonstrate our student engagement. That is the point of those. Participation is not engagement. If I'm sitting in a room while a lesson plan is being taught, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm engaged, as we all know. So, for example, can my lesson plan be an artifact for PDE? No. Can my IEP or transition plan for a student? No. But can my student reflection, can it be simply a prompt and my student writes a few sentences responding to a career readiness question? Then yes, that is an artifact. A rubric detailing the learning criteria that's aligned to the CEW, definitely an artifact. So thinking about those career standard benchmarks. All right, so we have these CEWs. Again, another thing that you all are very familiar with. 13.1, career awareness and preparation. 0.2, career acquisition. 0.3, retention and advancement, which can be a little bit difficult, right? How am I engaging in the workforce? And then what's my plan for staying and moving forward, my career pathway? And then number 4, entrepreneurship, which is, I know in the past, we've had lots of conversations with educators about how am I teaching entrepreneurship? When we get our students to think outside the box about how they can create their own sort of space in whatever industry they're going to be joining, when we get them to think about, how would I create a business out of this? Or how would I meet a need that is not currently being met in the industry? That's entrepreneurship. So the 339 plan articulates all of those things, right? How we're embedding these K through 12. We'll talk about that later on. So for your artifacts, right, we have our K through 5 collection, our 6 through 8, and then our 9 through 11. Now, the state, this is all of our requirements. You don't need me to read all of the numbers to you. But I think what's important to remember is that in K through 5, the state wants us to be thinking about how our students can engage in career exploration. And when we talk about K through 5 future readiness, we don't want to be asking our students, what do you want to be when you grow up? But we want to be asking them, who are you? And how do we help you discover who you are and the things that you enjoy in life? And a kindergartner can tell you those things. And we can prompt them and help them to answer those questions. And we will be having a workshop at a later date that focuses specifically on K-5 future readiness, because it is a slightly different animal than 6 through 12. When you get into 6 through 8, this is where the state is thinking, okay, so can we help our students be thinking about career preparation activities? And let's introduce this individual career plan. So that individual career plan, you've heard us refer to them as student plans over and over and over. that this, hopefully we are starting this, somewhere in 6th through 8th grade. We are beginning to think about how I might plan my future and what I want my journey to be after high school. That plan only counts as an artifact one time. Thank you, state. Then when we get to 9 through 11, this is where we are collecting even more artifacts, right? You have that portfolio you're working on, which is very nebulous and can look like anything. It's totally up to you. But this is where hopefully we are helping our students really to identify those steps that they are going to be taking after high school and exposing them to opportunities that help them to explore, if they're doing job shadowing, if they have an opportunity to meet with somebody from an industry that they are interested in and other industries to expose them to more options. So that's, I think it's important for us to remember that, yes, the artifacts are quite honestly a pain in the butt to collect and organize and collate, right? But there is a meaning behind them. And if we can remember that we want them to be meaningful and relevant for our students, this is an opportunity to create space for our students to think about who they are, who they want to be, where they're going in life, right? It connects back to our 3 questions, and hopefully we can help our students really answer them throughout K-12. So those individual career plans, remember, this is a thing that is created in 8th grade, and it's supposed to help our students explore, what are their plans for work, education, career after high school. And it might seem like, oh, that's so early, but you all know that our 8th graders, they're making plans, they have ideas. Our goal is to help them make informed plans and connect them to what are the real opportunities out there, what are all of the options, not just the people that not just what you're seeing, but can we expose you to lots of other options for career and education post-secondary. Now, if we go down our college and career measures and look at our industry-based learning indicators. So this is where we are now. This is something that our 12th graders, right? We're hopefully getting them somewhere in here throughout high school, and we can mark this off. So obviously we have option 1, the NOCD or NIMS, and then option 2, if they're going to a CTC or CTE, then okay, they're, hopefully doing really well. That's something they're interested in, that we've got that handled. And then option 3, those work-based learning experiences. That's that long list, and you can help your students participate in any one of these, and then that counts for, that's your checkoff, but hopefully these are really meaningful opportunities. Job shadowing, career mentoring, a lot of these can happen in small groups. They don't have to be one-to-one. We've done some work with lots of schools over the years, creating opportunities for that. Even if you're doing some small group career mentoring, it doesn't need to be, this is a career that this student is specifically interested in. They're still learning about careers and career exploration when they're talking to professionals about how do I enter a career? How do I advance my career? And so, if you prepare anybody who you're working with to be able to talk about just careers in general, then that is meaningful. That's a meaningful engagement for any student, whether they want to be, running their own manufacturing business or not. They still can gain from hearing from an adult who's in the real world, right? And what does that look like? And then all of those other apprenticeships, cooperative learning, community-based work programs, service learning project. If you're connecting your students with an opportunity to volunteer somewhere in your district, there you go, service learning project, right? There are requirements around that, certain hours, reflections, things like that. But it's really about providing an opportunity for your student to engage with, adults and professionals who they can learn something from about what it means to be an adult, what it means to be past 12th grade. And then our percentage of students participating in rigorous courses. We just want to talk a little bit about rigorous courses. So that's your advanced placement students, the IB, if any of you have that opportunity, the International Baccalaureate. Any dual credit courses, and that's 7 through 12. So if there's a dual credit course that a student is able to engage with in middle school, you're still able to count that for them. And then any of those concentrated CTE programs. Okay, that is all of the information I have for you. Well, not really, on that section. That's a taste. Go ahead, Debbie.
Yes, a taste. All of this is a taste, right? It's fundamentals. It's not designed to be comprehensive, but to make sure we have a common language for talking about future readiness so that we can build additional workshops based on that common understanding. So the next piece we have is on the career ready skills piece, and how that ties with social emotional learning. So the Pennsylvania Career Ready skills are essentially social emotional learning progressions that support the development of student competence. And they're all grouped within 3 domains. The 3 domains you see here are self-awareness and self-management, here on the left, establishing and maintaining relationships, and social problem-solving skills. They are directly tied to specific related employability skills. We hear all the time from our business partners, from our post-secondary partners, these are the skills we need our students to have. So even if you're in a place where your community is a little hesitant about the language, social emotional skills, it's important to recognize that like we need to be not only modeling these in a kind of quiet way, but calling them out and helping students name them. Because over here, these are excuse me, career ready skills are tied to the domains of social emotional learning as defined by Castle, if you're familiar with that group, very explicitly. And that these skills over here, you know, we talk a lot about soft skills, and these are the articulation of soft skills. Even though they're not assessed and reported on in the same way, they're a critical part of the overarching plan for preparing students for life after high school. One of the most recent pieces of evidence research that we have found on social emotional learning and career readiness is through this document called Educating Future Ready Students, a Policy Roadmap to Bridge Social and Emotional Learning and Career Workforce Development. And you don't have to worry about writing that down. We'll get you the link. We'll get you the slide deck after we're done. But it's a really solid approach to talking about why social emotional learning should be incorporated in your career and workforce development work, to help students be able to identify what their strengths are in those spaces, right? Because those are the questions you get asked in your job interview, right? Can you work as a team? Can you collaborate? Can you communicate well, right? That's all a part of these getting a job and then keeping that job, because I can work well with others. I can build relationships. I'm self-aware enough to be able to advocate for my needs, and when I get frustrated, I can manage that in an appropriate way. So a great document. We at the consortium are actually have been using that as a professional learning piece for us as well. So certainly it's not very long, which is a great feature, but really accessible in terms of learning about that. So because we're going really quickly, we just wanted to do kind of a midpoint review before we move on past the artifacts and the documentation of these first 2 sections. So quickly, Pennsylvania tracks the collection of artifacts to document the progress of students preparing for their futures through the mastery of standards, through those industry-based learning indicators, which usually take the form of work-based learning experiences for most students, through those student plans and the implementation of those plans, and then also rigorous coursework. And the other piece we've talked about so far is that career ready skills are social emotional skills, right? They're key for students' ability to obtain and retain employment, and they're part of Pennsylvania's Career Ready PA. You can talk about those. If you don't talk about those social emotional skills, you're still modeling them for your students, but you just don't equip them with the language to advocate for themselves long-term. So that's why we advocate for being more explicit in teaching and calling out and cultivating those skills. So because there are so many parts, the state requires a 339 plan. You might know of it as the school counseling plan. And it's intended, I know that it's not always this way, but it's intended to be a holistic, strategic, district-wide K-12 plan to address all counseling needs in your district, including future readiness. And ideally, it creates a roadmap to ensure that students meet their future readiness benchmarks. And though the 339 plans are counselor driven, as they should be, they are a huge piece of them. Stakeholder engagement is key, and engagement both in the planning and in the implementation, right? So you need teachers and administrators, you need students involved, parents, members of your business and business community and your community at large, your nonprofit organizations that may work with you, and then also post-secondary, right? Those folks all have a vested interest in seeing your students be prepared and be ready and have ideas about what might help them do that. Again, I cannot stress this enough. School counselors are not meant to do all the parts of the 339 plan. It is a district plan. So I know we hear all the time, like, well, they gave it to me. I'm the counselor and I'm supposed to do all the things. And it's like, no, you should drive the work, but you shouldn't be the only one doing the work. If you haven't seen the 339 plan template from the state, this is what it looks like. Please do not try and read it from the screen, but I always find the visual of the thing that the state provides to be a useful tool. So you're like, oh yeah, I have seen that before over in this other space. On the left column, in the left column of that document, it includes things like school counselor assignments by grade level and with their specific responsibilities. It includes the counseling department's mission, your program goals. It asks you to identify your stakeholders. So who else are important in your school system, in your school counseling system. And then has you identify the role of the school counselor as a leader, an advocate, a collaborator, and an agent of systemic change, which feels very big, just from an outside perspective. On the right-hand column, you have things like identifying an advisory council. It wants you to include your program calendar and how you're going to deliver your program. What's your curriculum action plan? It asks you to organize how you're organizing your career and post-secondary resources, those individualized academic and career plans for students. What's your strategy for engaging with your career and technical center? And asks you to include a job description for your school counselors. And even though they have that as a front and a back of a page, many of those sections have their own attachment templates to accompany them. So if you have not looked at a 339 plan, it is a lot in a small amount of space. So kudos to you, to those of you who manage your 339 plans, because they are robust. In an ideal world, these components provide a vision and an action plan for accomplishing everything you would hope to do with help. And we've had some folks in the past ask for, we don't have a 339 plan, or our 339 plan is old and we haven't revisited it very recently. If you'd like to see some publicly available 339 plans, McKeesport, Elizabeth Forward, and Franklin Regional all have their 339 plans posted publicly on their websites. So when you get this slide deck, you'll be able to click these links, or you can Google them in your free time and find them at your leisure. But I always like to point people to things, not to copy them, but to give you a place to start, because sometimes that blank page is really intimidating. So now I'm going to pass it off to Aaron. He's going to talk to you about Act 158.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Yeah, Act 158. It's a topic that doesn't sound exciting, but I'm actually pretty excited about it. This is a requirement that folks some of you may have been aware of for a couple of years. There's been discussion about this, but now things are really kind of getting into motion, being put into motion, and districts have to implement this new system for graduation. And Act 158, if you've been, if you're looking at your own graduation rate numbers in the Future Ready Index, Act 158 can really help boost that component for college and career ready measures. because it gives a lot of new ways for students to meet the graduation requirements. And I'll talk about that and break these down. So we had the old way, which is essentially your Keystone testing pathway, right? Now you look here, we have a lot of different pathways for students to qualify for graduation. You have your traditional Keystones, you have an alternative with the composite. If you're in CTE, there's a couple of different alternative assessments. You still have things like your students with IEPs and their transition plans, and there are some waiver options, a limited number of waiver options for students. So we'll break down these different pieces of Act 158, these different pathways. The state has put out a variety of correspondence on this. I'm sure some of you have seen the absolutely wild flow chart that they put out. I'm actually kind of a fan. I'm like, this is bold. So I'll if I can find it, I'll put it in the chat. There's a flow chart to explain all the different options for students. They've also created this Pathways to Graduation document that we're gonna zoom in on here that breaks down these different pathways. So as I mentioned, you have your original, you have the Keystone Proficiency pathway. Your students can, if they are proficient or advanced on all three of their Keystone exams, great. They qualify for graduation. They are good to go. That pathway still exists. You can still encourage all your students to take the Keystones. That's great. That's a great place to start. It actually provides a pretty good foundation. You can see relatively early on where your students are, and if they're meeting that Keystone pathway, that's a large number of students maybe you don't have to worry about for other pathways for graduation. But there's also now we have the composite pathway for Keystones, which I really love because personally, I was terrible at science and math. And so I appreciate this composite score pathway. So if you are proficient in at least one Keystone and your other two exams are at least basic, and your score adds up, if you're looking at all three, if it adds up to a 44.52 total, you're good to go. You can pass. I think this is really great because we don't all have to use all this content when we're adults, right? Like, let's be honest. So if you excel in one Keystone, you have an advanced score, and you don't quite get those proficiencies on two of your others, that's okay, and you can still graduate, right? That's a nice way, I think, to recognize that students have different skills, and we're not continually also putting students into remediation to continue to push them to get those proficiencies on their Keystones, right? And you also have the Keystone Exam to 2-score composite, which is in a way to address the waivers that we had during early pandemic, in the first year of the pandemic, where the students didn't all have to take their Keystone exam. So there are two different ways for students. If they have the scores, they can pass, they can graduate, and they don't have to have an advanced or proficient on all of their Keystones. I really like that one. For your CTE students, so any of your students are attending their CTCs, they have a pathway to graduation. Now you'll notice here, it still says meet locally established grade-based requirements. So students still need to pass those Keystone classes, those subject areas, pass their bio, pass their algebra, but they don't have to have the proficient or advanced on the test itself. They still need to pass, right? And then they pass those classes. For your CTE students, if they get an industry-based certification, right? If they pass their NOCTI or their NIMS, they pass those assessments. If they pass their CTC coursework at their CTC, they're on a path they can graduate. They're good to go, right? Which makes sense. If those students pass those tests and they are certified in their industry, why wouldn't they, right? They're ready to move on to the next step after graduation, right? They're prepared, which is what we want. That's the goal. So they're good to go. The next one we have is called the alternative assessment pathway. So again, you'll see, caveat, you still have to pass your Keystone subject area courses. You don't have to pass the test. You don't have to have proficient. And then you can have, as long as you meet one of these artifacts, So all of these alternative assessments, and it's a long list. Look at this. You have the ACT, the ASVAB, you have AP exams. If you have, as Christy mentioned earlier, if you have an IB program, getting a attainment of 4 or more on their IB tests. If they're enrolled in a pre-apprenticeship program, anybody here work with, the German American Chamber of Commerce? If you work with any of those pre-apprenticeship programs, students complete that. Or if you get accepted to a 4-year college or university, right? Again, this is a very logical, I think, step for students, right? Even if you can get into college, you get accepted to your next step, right? That 4-year post-secondary. Well, you're going where we all want our students to go anyways, right? You have a next step, you have a plan, you're ready to go. So Keystones aside, you're in a good spot, right? So having that evidence, you're moving on to the next step. The state says you're good to graduate, okay? And then this is the last one. This is kind of interesting. It's a really fascinating kind of mix and match for this pathway. So last time, still got past those Keystone subject area courses. And then you have these 2 columns. In section 1, you just have to have one of these, any one of these, all right? So getting just a 630 on any of the SAT subject tests. You have the ACT work keys, 3 or better on any AP exam. Again, that IB comes up, the industry recognized credentials, acceptance into a nonprofit institution, again. And then also having, in the second column, having 2 pieces of evidence. And these are really fascinating. So you have the Keystone exams, they come back here, right? Service learning projects. So if you have students who are going out and doing any kind of work-based learning, if they're doing that service learning component, that could count. If they're doing internships, if you have a co-op program at your school. I had one at mine. I graduated from Bear Johnstown. So we had folks who were going and working at the manufacturing company down the street. We had a co-op program. That would count. If you have a letter guaranteeing you have a job, a full-time job after you leave high school, which I know, I believe there are probably some folks on this call who work with the Partner Up program, maybe from PNC, where students are going through some training while they're in high school, and then they literally apply for and get it. They interview and they move on to full-time positions at PNC or Chrissy Deb, I think it was like FedEx, places like that. Yeah. So if your students have a full-time job lined up afterwards, that's a piece of evidence. There are so many different ways you can mix and match this. And it's a way that recognizes that students have so many different pathways that still make sure that they have a plan, right? And it doesn't come back to 3 subject area tests. If you're looking for a really great example, I think that breaks this down well for students, the Yak School District actually they've been really fascinated by Act 158 for a couple of years. They've been like ready for this. They were ready to dig in. And they took a lot of what the state put out and they synthesized it into a document that they actually share with all of their students. Their principal there is like their point person at the high school, and he meets with each student and he's like, okay, take a picture of this, put it on your phone, so you have it as a reminder for what you can do. And they have this conversation where they talk through, all right, here's where you are with your Keystones. Here's where, okay, you're going to the CTC. Okay, so you're on this pathway. This is your path to graduation. All right, you're working with, this business. Do you think, are you thinking you're going to move there and get hired full time after you graduate? Okay, cool. We're on this pathway. And so every student can really start to see where they are headed. And they use this document, they share it with parents, they publish it out. It's on their website. It's easy for everyone to see, so that everyone is aware that there are many different ways that their students can graduate and have a plan. If you're interested, you want to learn more about how they do things there, please email us. We'll put you in contact. They really, they're really excited about this. They still do their Keystone testing, but they're like, yeah, we're leaning fully into this. Take your Keystone test, but also it's okay if you don't, you don't get advanced or proficient on all, it's okay. We're going to work with you. We got a lot of different ways you can graduate. You'll be good to go, right? So like I said, I'm excited about this. And it's not often that like the state puts out something that I think like it's just they nailed it, but like this is pretty progressive. And I know there's probably people on here like, yeah, Aaron, also we have to do more tracking and this is going to be a pain. I recognize that. But for students, this is a really great way to move away from one kind of measure that I think doesn't do it justice for many, many students. And also, I think, holds them back from other experiences when we're always pushing to try to get them to those proficiencies on those tests. It's a way that we can personalize career planning for students here in Pennsylvania. Recognize that there are many ways that students can have a plan, that they can be prepared, and that we can meet them where they're at, right? There's not just one pathway. And so I encourage everyone who's maybe new to this to really lean into that and think about what all these new graduation opportunities mean for your students. Because there's a heck of a lot of new ways that we can help them be prepared now. Yeah. So to recap, PDE has a complex approach to future readiness. There are a lot of different components to this, right? Those benchmarks that Christy talked about, student plans, really tying together all those experiences that students have, all those artifacts they collect. What do they mean? How do they reflect on that and think about how they make changes and decisions about where they want to go next? Getting those industry-based learning indicators, getting students out and having those experiences, internships, job shadowing, getting them certifications so that they're ready to go after they graduate, having that rigorous coursework. Individual student plans are really that kind of key piece. Really encourage you all to lean into that, pushing students to think about what their actual plan is. If we just do artifacts, yeah, I mean, we that's good, but having students really think about what that means for them and how that influences their decisions in the courses they take and the experiences they seek out and the next steps they take after they graduate is really, really important. And I know Christy will talk about this I think eventually we'll do a student plans workshop. The value of talking to your students and having conferences where they lead and reflect on all the work they've done is so important. Getting students to really think about that. Debbie had talked about career ready skills are SEL skills. It's true. These are things that if we really want our students to be successful in life after they graduate in their jobs, yeah, career ready skills really are SEL skills. It's really true. And if you're looking for language, as Debbie said, if folks are a little worried about that SEL terminology, well, career ready skills will get you there. It's the same thing. They're very intertwined. Your 339 plan as the adult. So this is like your, if the student plan is essential for your graduates, the 339 plan is what pulls it all together for you and your team. Debbie mentioned it's not just for counselors. It's something that everyone hopefully has a voice in, has a piece, a role in creating and pushing out all of these different components. It ties all of this PA work together. And then, of course, Act 158. Lean into it. It's a great opportunity. It really is. Think about where your students are. And I hope you can move a lot of the conversations away from just Keystone exams, because there's a lot of new opportunities now for students to get where they want to go in a way that we can personalize their career planning, right? It's a lot. It's a lot. And I know there are some folks on here who have a team, and there are some folks who are like, yep, it's me. I do this. If you need help, if you want to talk to us, come email us. We have our emails in here. We're happy to help. We might be able to connect you to somebody who at another school who has some really great ideas. Please, if you want to engage with us more, there's a lot of work that we do that focuses around future readiness in a variety of ways. Project-based learning, human-centered design, and design thinking, helping students develop those key soft skills, right? Debbie talked about. We do provide support for district leadership teams. We have some teams on here today. shout out to you all for being here from the Future Ready Alliance. We do help facilitate some conversations around implementing personalized student-centered learning and skill building for students, helping them find a sense of belonging in their school. And we have some free resources here. We are a nonprofit, so we give a lot of stuff away for free. We have a human-centered design videos, a whole library. If you're looking for some exposure for your students to just see what's out there, it's not easy to get your students out of the building. We have a library of I think 120 videos, Debbie, for career journeys, all interviews with professionals, talking about advice, their pathways, skills you might need. It's a great way if your students can't get out of the building to get some exposure to some of the pathways they're interested in. Likewise, we have a snack and learn program that talks about alternatives, not just your four-year college pathway, but a variety of different internships for tech, for trade unions, you name it. There's a lot of free programming out there for students to engage with, post-secondary training that they can pursue for their pathways. And then we have 2 opportunities coming up. One is a human-centered design training. I know we have some folks on this call, I think, who are probably attending our human-centered design training in December. And then we will have a personalized learning workshop on December 13th. We'll talk about a variety of different ways you can personalize learning for students. So that ties directly into this work with Future Ready, the fundamentals here. If you have your phone ready, you can pull that up now. But as I mentioned in the chat, you'll also get a copy of this slide deck. And stay connected. We're on YouTube. I think we have like 400 videos on there. There's a lot of Future Ready resources out there for you. We encourage you follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn. Okay. Let's pause for questions. We covered a whole lot.
So our 339 plan, we just started revising. It hasn't been touched since 2017. The advisory council, is that absolutely required? And how many meetings a year are required for the advisory council?
Joanne, I don't actually know how many meetings or people are required for the advisory council. I actually sit on the advisory council for both McKeesport and North Hills. So most of those 2 groups have a makeup of like parents, students, community partners, and businesses. And we meet once or twice a year. It's not intense.
So it doesn't have to be quarterly. We were doing them quarterly years ago, and we sort of, once the pandemic hit and we moved away, we didn't ever move back.
Yeah. Emily Mather just put that 2 meetings are required. So
2. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. Other questions? I know you have questions. You ask me when I see you.
Yeah, as far as the documentation, like within the system, are we itemizing like in the Act 158 system, what exactly the documents are for each student, or if they met the scores? Is it like a listing of students, PA Secure ID, how the documentation would go?
I'm not sure how it's being reported back to the state, Eugene. I don't know if it's a checkbox or if it's a drop down, pick the pathway, or if you have to be more specific. I honestly don't know. I know some folks on here have been in the Act 158 webinars from the state. I don't know if they've covered it there. If anybody else has knowledge, feel free to chime in. But that's a level of knowledge we don't, I don't know today. I can find out for you if nobody knows.
I can chime in if that helps.
Please.
CTE School District, we're actually working through ours as well. So some of the documentation you do have to download and then you upload it into the system, but they're not asking for student specific information. They also said this year that the templates, the old templates, are not required. They still have them on the website and you can use them, but they're not requiring any specific template as long as the information that's listed is present. So our school district is creating just basically an electronic binder to put all the sections in, so our counseling team can kind of work through each of those components that's in the My PDE suite where you have to upload them. We're keeping it in an electronic binder. And then as they add to it and change documents, then I can just upload them. But a lot of the documents, there are actually stipulations that you can't go over a certain number of pages. So you have to be careful when you download them into PDFs and then upload them again, that it doesn't go over their page allotment. But the templates, it doesn't matter what you use as long as the information is present. I've just been working with them because it's a new system this year. So their website, PDE, it's not correlating to what they're asking us to put in there now.
That's super helpful. Thank you so much, Emily.
Emily, can I ask you if the student did not get Keystone Proficiency and is using the acceptance to a four-year school, do you as a counselor have to have a copy of the letter, or would if we do an instant decision day and the admissions counselor sends me a list or an Excel spreadsheet of students who were accepted on the spot, is that sufficient evidence to upload in that PDE suite?
I do not know that answer. I'm sorry.
All right, thanks.
Emily, we appreciate all of the things that you do know. Thank you. And we can, do a little bit of research on our end. And if there are others who, as you find out answers to these, that process of uploading, I know when the artifacts were new, the process of like, what do we put in PIMS? What don't we? That was very confusing. So of course, this for Act 158 would also be confusing. So yeah, we will do our best to find information for you. Probably, which will mean just talking with people as you attempt this process.
Yeah, I would say also, like, all these questions about Act 158 will inform Act 158 workshop that we will be having in the spring semester. So ask all your questions and we will do our best to find reasonable answers. As Emily said, and you all know, the system is new for uploading. So of course it has lots of hiccups and things that have to be worked out. And in general, I would say, try not to panic. We'll work, it will work out. That seems to be the way with the state, that they are imperfect in executing new things. But the feedback you give them is really important for them to fix the problems. So keep trying, I guess.
Debbie, does anyone have any clarification? This is Kevin from Woodland Hills. Hi. Hi, everybody. Does anyone have any clarification about the unconditional acceptance to a four-year program piece of this for 158?
Yeah, you mean what are the what conditions might there be?
Well, it's unconditional. So
right.
I'm assuming that means that if I get into a two-year program at CCAC, that doesn't count. Or if I am accepted on instant decision day, but then need some sort of prerequisites of something, that is not unconditional.
Okay.
Or something. Does anyone have any insight into that?
So I have two thoughts, though I'm sure the group has others. One is, if you're unconditionally accepted to the four-year, that's that's a different pathway, and I don't have it in front of me. Aaron, what's the pathway to the left of the evidence-based?
That's alternative assessments.
The alternative assessments. So that unconditional acceptance is part of the that pathway. But if you have a student who's accepted to a two-year, that can be one piece of evidence for the evidence-based pathway. So don't write them off if they're accepted to your local community college, but not to a four-year. That's my first thought. In terms of conditions, I mean, that in my mind, that's any type of condition would exempt them from an unconditional, whether that's they need to take a remediation class if they need, and it also says that it needs to be college bearing coursework. So even if they had to do a concurrent enrollment in a remediation class, that wouldn't count. Right. So if I get to take Math 101, but I have to simultaneously take Math 97, that would be an issue, because that's a remediation class. And at least the college that I worked at, they did some research and saw that concurrent enrollment in remediation classes saw better success for those students. So I would be surprised if no other colleges had that kind of setup. So watch for that. If they need to pass a certain, if they need to have a certain GPA or pass a certain class before they are accepted, that those would also be conditions. I don't think they mean any kind of financial conditions, but I could be mistaken.
Right. And I never assumed that, or didn't sound like that to me, because I've been to several of the webinars, and I just, my stomach kind of sinks every time I hear that, because I'm just worried that some people don't understand what unconditional means, because you can't just apply to CCAC, get in and say, oh, that's your pathway. Especially if, like, even CCAC would say, well, you need remedial writing, or I mean, I see it happen to kids all the time. They're going to CCAC, but they have to take the semester before a writing a comp course or something like that.
Right. And then they use all their financial aid on their remediation courses.
Exactly.
So I would just, if you have a student who I don't believe, I could be wrong about this. Again, I don't have it in front of me while we're talking, but I believe that even conditional acceptance to the 2-year can count as one piece of evidence for the evidence-based pathway.
Right. Okay.
So if that's the case for your students, push them towards that last pathway and see what other forms of evidence you can come up with. One of the things that Yak is doing is, they have a partnership set up for students to get those service learning hours. I think it's a food bank at a church that's close by to them, like down the road. So transportation is pretty easy. And they have a way for students to get out to get those service learning hours when they need it. So that if you have a partnership that you can leverage to help make sure that students meet those evidence-based pieces for the ones who don't meet fulfill other pathways, those could be helpful in kind of streamlining your approach to making sure students can graduate as expected.
Debbie, I guess it's pretty obvious to us when a student is admitted conditionally in a summer bridge program, because the admissions counselors are pretty explicit about that. But we would have no access to students in the summer when they meet their academic advisor or take their placement exams to know if they're doing below 100 level courses. So from my perspective, before you do this 158 thing in the spring, excuse me, maybe clarify that if a student shows us a letter, you've been accepted, unless the letter says you need to do a summer bridge program or start 4 weeks early, we will consider that regardless of their placement exams or the coursework they take at the collegiate level to be unconditional acceptance, because we just can't dive in that deeply with every kid.
I agree. that you can only go off the evidence that's provided to you by the student or the college. And so if there are more hoops that the student has to go to, but that is not readily reported back to you, if I were the state, which I am not, I would think that it would be unreasonable for me to expect you to make sure every student you graduated based on their acceptance to a 4-year didn't ultimately end up needing some kind of additional remediation. That's too much from my perspective. I am not the state. So we can try and verify, but they may say they don't know. We'll do our best for you, Joanne. If you have any additional questions about Act 158 specifically, if you could put those in the chat before you sign off, that would be super, super helpful to us. Again, we prefer to design content based on your needs. So the more we know about what your needs are and what questions you have, the better we can make sure that we design for that. But otherwise, thank you all so much for coming. for being with us on a Friday morning when you just want to think about Thanksgiving and your time off. Thank you so much for coming. If you have questions, put them in the chat, and otherwise have a great weekend and a great Thanksgiving.